Welcome to the Richie and Rogue Show, Dave. How lovely to see you.
Nice to see you too, Rogue.
First of all, let me just say thank you for your service and thank you for everything that you have done for this country. That means an awful lot to us. We value that. But I want to hear more about how they have suffered with war and then the aftercare that has... You laugh because we all know that the aftercare is non-existent. So I've been dealing and speaking to a lot of veterans recently, and I have to say that I am as disillusioned as they are with the aftercare that they've received. But I want to hear more about you. I just want to know where it started and then how your journey began.
As a kid, absolutely as a kid. When I was kind of growing up, we used to play English and Germans in the schoolyard, cowboys and Indians and all that sort of thing. And I had these volumes of books called The War Illustrated, I think it was called. And it was basically loads of newspaper clippings from the Second World War that kind of went through everything that was going on. I suppose it was propaganda, but it did everything. I had vehicle breakdowns, weapon breakdowns. I had action men as a kid. I built trenches in the garden. And I suppose that's where it came from. I always knew I was going to be a soldier. That's all I ever wanted to be.
So then the age of 16 is the age that you can then formally apply. What happened at that point?
Well, I applied to join, to be an army apprentice. But unfortunately, I'd lost my parents. My father died when I was 8. My stepdad died when I was 12. My mother passed away just shortly before going to be an apprentice. And I was released from that. I was going to join the King's Regiment as an infantry and go to Harrogate, which was the Army Apprentice College. And of course I had a younger sister who was 2 years younger than me. So I kind of bailed from that with the Army's blessing and went to be a pork butcher, working in the same place as my mum used to work. And frankly, hated it. Mm-hmm. You know, it wasn't what I wanted to do, to work for Rumbelows.
Rumbelows, I remember that.
Rumbelows, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the former Currys, isn't it? Completely opposite to what you wanted to do. Yeah. I mean, building trenches, looking through the magazines, the newspaper cutting. There's like an idealisation about it.
I don't think that was the case, to be honest. You know, I'd always been attracted to a life of adventure. So, you know, I'd started off into the Boy Scouts and then into Venture Scouts. So I was doing that. And quite frankly, once my parents had died, to be honest with you, I was walking a tightrope between jail and not jail. You know, I was doing some pretty shitty stuff as well in with all that. And sometimes the lines got blurred and I got myself into an awful lot of trouble, ended up in court and being pulled by the police for things, and just things that, looking back on my time now, I'm quite appalled by, really, because that's certainly not me. And I suppose within those years, the idea of joining the army at that time kind of dulled a little bit, because I was also, once you get to 18, then you can legally start drinking. So I was drinking as well, and I was whoring, and I was doing all the things that a teenager does at that age, and having a bit of a good time mostly. And I think the catalyst came because I'd run out of options. That was the time then to either take the bull by the horns and go for it or not. And so I did. I bizarrely ended up joining the medical corps. And to this day, for some reason, I don't really know why. I think it was because there was a few things that happened to me in the run up to that where I encountered people who'd been seriously injured. And I was out one night making my way back home, and this guy got hit by this Volkswagen. I saw him go up in the air and land behind me, and the vehicle disappeared. And I was like, what do I do? There was others as well and so when they gave me the option about what I wanted to do, I initially said military police. Thank God I didn't go down that route. And there's a couple of other professions. And at that time, they offered me medical assistant. And I said, what's that? And they said, well, it's like being an ambulanceman in the army kind of thing. I joined the medical corps.
So when you joined then for the medical side of things, again, you've resonated with a trauma you've seen. So somebody has obviously been badly injured, via a car crash. Yep. That has then provoked you into a line of job description per se, right? So you're now heading down that way. So what then happened next?
So then you go into basic training. So you do phase 1 training, which is kind of all the things you do to, to get into the army. So you do all the physical, you do all the sort of basic soldiering type stuff. Because even as a medic, your class is you still have to be a soldier before you can go and do your specialized trade training. So I did all that, and then once that had completed, they put me in a program to become a medical assistant.
For me personally, people find it a real honour, or found it a real honour, to fight for this country, right? I know that you said that wasn't your main drive, but a lot of people are like, I want to serve, I want to fight, and I want to, be accountable for this country and make sure that this country is safe. We're now going to fast forward a minute, because, you've gotten in and you're going through your basic training, but the lack of people now in the army, or who are wanting to actually join the army, because nobody wants to fight for Keir Starmer. What can we do about that?
Get rid of Keir Starmer. That's a good start. I think there's a number of problems at the moment. First of all, there is a societal change in the way that people view the military, especially among young people, and their willingness to want to be engaged in any warfare or any violence of any sort. So that's one obstacle to come over. You've got to kind of, the army needs certain types of people, and they need them to be physically fit, and they need to be able to follow orders, which is, again, something which, youth culture today doesn't do. They've got their own minds. They want to go their own ways and do their own things. And the police find this, when they go into police, people want to be a police officer, and then when they get faced with the reality of policing, they pull the plug. And to some extent, it's the same in the military. And in order for a military to be effective, to some extent, you can't just do training, you can't just do warfare, which is the thing that drew you to the thing in the first place. So if you're not doing that, what are you doing? Well, quite a lot of the time you're doing fairly mundane duties. You're doing things, painting boxes, putting up tents, doing demonstrations, practicing for when you might be deployed. And so there is, to some degree, a degree of boredom within that. Not everybody can be a paratrooper, not everybody can be a Royal Marine. And some of the trades have been lost. We don't have very many chefs anymore, for example. I still think the army represents a good option for a lot of people if you want to go into sort of engineering and mechanical aids, or if you want to go into communications. And to some extent these days, even the medical corps is probably good, especially at some of the professional levels, where the registered levels, like physiotherapist and radiographer and operating theatre technician, pharmacists, and all those specialities are there for people. And they come away with qualifications from that. But for the other soldiers that don't have those civilian equivalent, like infantry soldiers, for example, it's really difficult for them to transition back into CV Street. I think in terms of those that join there is an element of family history there, where they may have family members that have been in the military, and what the skills that the military would give me.
You went in, like we said, you then had done the medical route. What then transpired from you journeying through that?
Once you've trained as a soldier and trained as in my case, initially a medical assistant, I was posted out to Germany, because that's where everything was going on. We were racked up and lined up to face the Russian hordes, should they have invaded Europe at that point. And so there was a massive NATO presence, and the Americans were in Germany, the Dutch were in Germany, the Belgians were in Germany, the Germans were in Germany, and of course the Brits had a significant part of that. Practicing as a soldier, a medical soldier, within that context. So it was the Cold War time. I got deployed to Northern Ireland. That was my first major deployment. I think in the following year that I joined up, I think I deployed to Germany winter of 1982. And then I think it was 1983 when I went, they sent me to Northern Ireland, to Londonderry. Jesus Christ, talk about out of the frying pan into the fire. And there I was in a conflict on our home soil, and not a clue. Not a clue. I was just doing what I should have done, what they needed me to do, without really understanding a number of things. The political context of what was going on, I had no clue. To me, Catholics were bad, Protestants were good. That was kind of in my simple mind.
Is that an indoctrination from the army? This is what they're saying?
It's not indoctrination from the army. I think it's a lack of understanding at that point of what a soldier needs to be able to go in and do their job properly in terms of education. Now, education in the military is massively improved now. And then, I actually look back fondly on some of the education courses that I did in order to gain promotion. So, you know, I thought they were really well organised and really well put together. But no, back then it was, you know, get out there, support this particular regiment in the field while they were doing their patrolling within Northern Ireland. If anything bad happens, get your med bag, go deal with it. And I realised a number of things at that point. Firstly, I didn't know enough about what was going on in Northern Ireland, so I had no clue about geopolitics. I also realised that the medical training that I'd been given was rubbish for the type of job that I was doing. I was lucky enough to come across a medical book by an American doctor called Nancy L. Caroline, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, who was a brilliant medical educationalist. And I consider that my learning as a medic, which very shortly after suddenly became combat medic, they changed the designation, was the foundation actually for what came after that. So I think everything that I'd had before in terms of specialist training, yes, some of it has been really, really useful, and certainly I still welcome that now, but the trauma training and the training specifically for combat type injuries was very poor. And it was Nancy Caroline's book that really sort of put me on the pathway to deal with trauma, from all sorts of trauma really, but of course then specialising in military trauma.
So at the moment we're looking at obviously Israel, Iran, the war that is affecting the whole world. You know, every single country is affected by this. Have you been over there?
I suppose I've been in the Middle East quite a few times. I've been into Iraq. Was one of the business ventures I had when I left the military, involved training personnel to look after American forward operating bases. In Afghanistan, I worked with the UN, and I set up the emergency and primary healthcare service for the first national elections. So that was looking after UN personnel in collaboration with Afghan National Army, Afghan National Police, elements of the US military, UK, and all other military components that were over there. So we were all tied together. And we had our own command structure under a Canadian colonel. I had 5 helicopters that we had deployed in various places around Afghanistan. And basically we delivered basic healthcare on site to those people that were doing things like voter education and voter registration prior to the very first national Afghan elections.
Didn't you guys, as in the Americans and the English, start to train up the Afghanistan in weapons and teach them how to operate them?
Yeah.
Has that not been the demise of us now?
So there was a lot of, I mean, I can't break down the statistics for you, but there was a lot of people that worked with both the US military and the British military and others who acted as interpreters and guides while conducting combat operations in Afghanistan. So when the remarkable decision by Joe Biden to pull troops out of Afghanistan, despite the fact there was only a very small military presence there, which was actually really involved in training Afghan army, Afghan police, those type of on missions that would help Afghanistan, there was a lot of big feeling of betrayal. But there was also a real risk to those people that had assisted the Western nations with translation services and professional services, where their lives and their families' lives were put in great danger. And frankly, I think we did have an obligation to bring those people and get them out and to relocate them. I absolutely believe that. I think we betrayed a lot of people by doing that. We brought those people over, and I don't know what's happened to them since then. I can't give you a commentary on whether, you know, they were well looked after or whether they're resentful or whether there's anything going on. But I do know there's a lot of Afghanis coming over now simply because we gave up Afghanistan to the Taliban. And we all know what the Taliban are like. They're an extreme Islamic fundamentalist organization. Can't remember what year Biden decided to do that, but the world was thrown into a bit of a fluster because the Americans were pulling out and everybody was going with them. I mean, everybody remember the scenes of chaos at the airports. You know, those people were trying to get out. We did leave a lot of interpreters and people that we should have kind of brought with us. But it didn't happen. People that are fleeing the Taliban over there are looking for safe havens around the world. And so many of them are now coming here. Now, I suppose it would make sense that if there are some Afghans already here, that some of those that are currently fleeing would make contact with some of those. We are getting those migrants coming over here in the boats, and that's not being stopped. And that was an election commitment from Keir Starmer. You know, that was an election commitment that would help to protect the UK from so many things. You know, a lot of what stems from what's going on now is about the rise in the amount of immigration that's coming over here, and the burden of responsibility for financing those falls on the taxpayer.
What's the worst thing that you've seen when you've been out there representing your country?
I think Bosnia was probably one of the worst places to be. That was a nasty, nasty conflict. Of course, you know, that was no conflict is easy to understand. No conflict is easy to understand. But while representing the country, I think Bosnia is right up there. And there was some, what I would, I suppose, consider many war crimes committed in that country by both sides, by Serbs and by the Muslim elements that were over there. Probably been out in Darfur as post-military, doing work over there. That was quite, came very close to getting killed in Darfur. So that was another interesting time. But you saw the misery of what goes on there with displaced persons. You had the Sudanese government trying to basically kill the Darfurians. And again, it comes back to oil in some respect, oil and gas, and minerals and resources. And you know, they were basically trying to commit genocide on a population in Darfur. And to see the displaced persons camps around the area where I was in Darfur, and to see the misery in those camps and the abuse that was taking place in those camps, and the rather ineffectual effect of non-governmental organisations. I have a deep mistrust of those people. I think they often cause more harm than they do good. For me personally, not only witnessing and seeing the atrocities that man can do to man, but also having to treat some of the patients and casualties that came out of that when our troops.
What is the worst thing for you that haunts you from what you've seen?
I don't want to tell you. I don't want to tell you. So I had to deal with an incident in Kabul where a hospital or a section of a hospital collapsed. About a 100-metre section of hospital collapsed. And 4 stories pancaked, one on top of the other. One end was an apex, but at the other end it literally sheared from the rest of the hospital. This hospital was being renovated because it had been diagnosed that the concrete that built it was suffering from a thing that I don't even know is a thing. But they said it was concrete cancer, which basically is a destruction of the concrete that was holding that hospital up. And rather than actually solving the problem, all they would do was concreting over the rot, if you like. And late one night, this building collapsed. And at that time, there was no formal medical services outside of NATO in Kabul at that point. There was myself and 2 others in Kabul at that time, and we were going out on the Kabul helicopter on a daily basis to deliver care to where we needed to deliver it to. And we got a call from the UN saying, look, can you deploy to this location in the centre of Kabul and start helping? It was utter and complete chaos. And I guess the first 30 seconds I was overwhelmed by it. People were just running everywhere. And so entering into that building probably was the scariest thing I've ever done. And then I encountered a guy who was alive. But he had a massive concrete block right across his belly. And he was covered in dust. And I just remember looking into his eyes, and he was still alive. And that's all I'm going to say on that.
that's really, really hard to go through. And in all honesty, what you're really saying is that you had to sit with him and watch him die. And that is horrific. And I can imagine that will stay with you. And so many other soldiers who have watched their friends, their colleagues, innocent people die. Was it worth it?
Yes, because I don't suffer from PTSD. I've never suffered from PTSD. I was able to process that. And maybe because I'd encountered death before, at an early age. Experience I had with my parents dying at an early age had a beneficial effect on my resilience when it came to dealing with people who were dead. And so I was able to process what happened and manage it, and it's never been a problem. In fact, the only time it became a problem was a few years ago. I went to Bolivia and I had vivid dreams of this guy, but I was up at altitude. I was up at nearly 4,000 meters.
That can affect your
Well,
thinking.
I didn't know it at the time, but yeah. So it turns out there's a thing called high altitude dreaming.
Yeah.
But this was a really lucid dream, and I was worried that because I knew that veterans from Burma, for example, in the Second World War, sometimes develop symptoms of PTSD later on in life. And I'm not saying that I won't go down that road. I don't think I will, but I knew it was a thing, is what I'm trying to say. So I knew it was a thing. So when this happened, many, many years after, for me, I think it was 2004, 2005 when that occurred. And this was literally a few years ago. I was out on doing a TV show, and yeah, I was really worried about it. Really worried about it. So much so that I, put in a satellite call back to home and to have a conversation with my wife and just say. But a friend of mine who is an altitude buffoon. I mean, he's done all 8,000 meter peaks. The guy's a bit of a beast.
Altitude junkie.
Yeah, so he sort of said, "Oh, well, maybe it's high altitude dreaming." He said, "It'll settle down when you get back down to sea level," and it did.
Okay.
And all I really had to do was reprocess it again, and it's not been a problem.
Okay. So for the people that can't process it,
But it's a big problem, and I know many people that are down that road. In fact, yeah, I know.
percentage-wise,
personally.
roughly, how many do you think really suffer with PTSD versus somebody like yourself who can process it?
I would think quite a lot. I don't know what the percentages are. I have no clue. I would guess that it's somewhere between maybe 25 and 30%.
Of people that have PTSD?
There are people serving with PTSD.
Yeah.
There are people we're serving
I mean,
that have PTSD even while they're serving, and then either leave or they reach the end of their service period and then leave. And then, of course, they don't have the support of their colleagues anymore. Whereas to some extent, when you're in a unit, a lot of the PTSD can be managed. In the initial stages, PTSD is a management problem. It's about going out, getting together with your colleagues and those that were there and managing what happened and discussing what happened from everybody's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because everybody's perspective is going to be different about every single incident that you come across. And so, that was a big thing in the military in the first instance. If it gets to the point where you need to bring psychiatry into it, then you've probably failed. By that time, those patients need specialist care, CBT and, NLP and all those kind of things that go on after that. And so I really think that, immediately after an incident has occurred where bad shit's happened, is that, that debrief process, a very low level, within the ranks of the people that were involved, managed, is a really good thing to do from the first instance. Because in order to get that and to understand it. And I think the other thing that there is as well is, I see this a lot with the police, and one of the worries, because one of my jobs is just to train specialist firearms officers in pre-hospital care. And in the current state of affairs, the way things are, many of them, particularly in the major cities, are seeing trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma because the ambulance service are not often there to be able to be first responders to those incidents. And my big worry is that there is a danger that some of these guys, you know, will end up becoming disaffected by that through either a complete apathy or through a form of PTSD. And you know, for special operators as well, the Americans recognize it, but we don't, bizarrely. There's a thing called operator-induced PTSD, when that's particularly referring to special forces soldiers who we know who are at the tip of the spear when it comes to kicking doors in and killing people and so forth. You know, when you take somebody's life, you take that burden within yourself in some way, in some measure. And you know, we struggle certainly in the modern world to be able to do that. It's a huge morality issue. I mean, some people, again, it's like water off a duck's back to them, but to other people it affects them. Seeing things affects them. You know, seeing things. I mean, I remember distinctly going down the Basra Road after the first Gulf War, and it almost became a tourist thing that people wanted to go there. And the Americans had dropped these fuel air bombs over the Basra Road on a massive convoy of so-called Iraqi soldiers and completely incinerated that convoy. It was huge. But then when you got there and you looked around and you saw children's toys, teddy bears, and you think, fuck, these weren't just soldiers that were in this thing, these were people.
Yeah.
So, you know, PTSD is a constant thing. And the problem is that we don't have the support that we should have as veterans. We've closed, because of defence cuts, we've pretty much closed the vast majority of our military medical facilities. You know, we've handed over our rehabilitation services to basically a joint civilian military establishment. You know, I don't think we have a military hospital anymore. And we used to have military hospitals all over the place. So, you know, the support is not there. And, you know, the government a number of years ago introduced this military covenant, you know, and that gave us supposedly some certain guarantees. And it just gets breached time and time and time again. You know, in terms of PTSD specifically, there's this thing called Up Courage where you're supposed to get access to specialist care urgently. Don't get it. A friend of mine had to access Up Courage recently, and the earliest appointment they could give him was 6 weeks. Well, that's no good if you're in crisis on this particular day. You're just like anybody else. You might as well just ring up the Samaritans. So, you know, for me, that is a scandal. And that is a failure by all governments, not just this government. And what's compounding that, going back to your original question, is that this relentless pursuit of UK Special Forces soldiers for crimes that were initiated by a different government, by a different government. Okay, the government of the day put those soldiers in those positions that they're in, and it's today's government now that are trying to prosecute those very soldiers that were protecting and defending the people of Northern Ireland.
Yeah, and Keir's doing it pro bono.
And he's doing it pro bono.
Like, what a traitor, a treacherous man to the veterans, to this country.
I think you'd be hard pushed to find many veterans that would support this government at this time. And I'm not saying there isn't any, of course there are, but I think there's a vast majority of veterans who probably think like I do that, you know, there's been a massive betrayal, you know, on all fronts. And, you know, there's letters being written to generals. There's generals predicting civil war. Military officers that are predicting civil war. You know, our UK Special Forces Association feels absolutely betrayed by the actions of this government in pursuing this agenda. This shouldn't be happening. No. Now, if you've committed a legitimate crime, if you like that has happened, then absolutely that should be investigated. You know, people should uphold the rules of law and the rules and the use of force. And I absolutely agree with that. But in these particular situations, they were placed there. They knew these attacks were going to happen. They were deliberately put there. Why did they put the Special Air Service in that position? Why didn't they use a specialist police unit if they wanted a police in action? So when an organisation comes in as a pronounced terrorist organisation, prescribed terrorist organisation, comes up firing its weapons, what did they think was going to happen in return?
Yeah.
Do you think they were going to tickle him to death? They met force with force and won. And now they're being prosecuted for it. And that is despicable.
Yeah.
Despicable.
If you could say something to Keir Starmer and you could look him right in the eye, what is it that you would say to him?
I won't look him in the eye, I'd poke his eyes out.
That's the best you can do. What would you say to him? What has he done to some of your fellow veterans? What would you say?
Resign.
That's it. Resign.
What do you want me to say to him? What can I say to him? Everybody in the world right now is saying to him, resign, resign, resign. The guy's got skin of a rhino. He doesn't care. He's got an agenda. He's an ideologist. He is pursuing an agenda which he doesn't care who he upsets, because the agenda is already set in stone. It's that 2030 agenda, and we can all see it happening. And now people are starting to awaken to it. And this is where the rise is coming from. This is where the rebellion's coming from. And you're prescribed as right wing. Okay, if that's what I am, I'm right wing. I'm right wing. Get the fuck out. You know, get somebody in there who can do the job. Even if it means having to put up with Farage for a term or two.
What do you think about Rupert Lowe?
I think Rupert Lowe is probably right now, given my experience with Advance UK, our best chance going forward. I think he needs time to develop Restore. I think that he needs to build the foundations on concrete, and he's got a good start. You know, without doubt, the meteoric rise of membership into Restore UK far exceeds anything else, and it certainly far exceeded Advance UK. I think.
Sorry, you talk about Advance UK. What was your experience with Advance UK?
Amateurs in a pool, in a puddle of mud.
Amateurs in a puddle of mud. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you met Ben? What do you think of Ben?
I think Ben, on the whole, I like Ben. I listened to the things that he had to say, and I think he's very articulate. I think his motives are good. I think his team need to go take their heads for a wobble. I think they're awful. I think their ability to run that party is what will destroy that party.
Okay.
So, and that's why I say that Rupert Lowe, the road that he seems to be going down, he seems to be building his foundations in concrete. He seems to be surrounding himself with good people. Obviously, time will tell, because politics is a dirty business at the end of the day. But right now, I'm holding my cards close to my chest. But I think, if things keep going the way they are doing for Rupert Lowe, I think that's where my political allegiance would lie.
So if you were 16 today, would you be wanting to go into the army?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because I've asked that question to others and they've said absolutely not.
No, I would go. I think it's a career choice for people. I think for young people, it's provided me with a set of skills which are not necessarily military in how they are applied in my current life. So I have been able to use what I know and what I've learned through the military and through the scouting movement. And I've got to put my hand up to the scouting movement. Without the scouting movement, I already had a set of basic skills when I went into the military. And I recognised the value that they brought to my life at an early age, particularly in the formative years. The military added to that, and it gave me a new set of skills. Working out of Hereford and being part of UKSF as part of the medical component there, that gave me another perspective, and it allowed me to take my skills to a different level, a new level. That I was then, when I retired, and part of the reason why I retired and stayed on actually was because I didn't agree with the second Gulf War. I blamed Tony Blair for a false war.
What do you think of him, Tony Blair?
I think he's treasonous. I think he's in the same pigeonhole as Keir Starmer.
Do you think they're working together?
I can't believe that this guy has an influence on today's politics. The damage that man has done through the fabric of British politics and through and world politics, it seems, is going to take years and years of untangling. Because there's no quick fix. I don't think there's any quick. Whoever wins the next election, you're not going to sort the problems out in 4 or 5 years. It's going to take 2-3 terms, I think. you know, and those 2-3 terms, it's going to be hard for the British people. I don't think there's no easy way out of where we're at now in terms of the pit that we're in. You know, and whoever wins, whether it's Reform, whether it's the Greens, whoever it is, have got a mighty mess to get out of, and at the same time manage a population that is becoming increasingly disgruntled with politics within the UK. You know, while I don't think we're yet at the point of a civil war, we're certainly at the point of civil disobedience. One major incident, like similar to what happened in Southport, is likely to be the trigger. And that's a scary thought, because we have no police. We don't have enough police. Most of the police that we do have, the vast majority of them are sat behind desks. You know, we're going to be having to rely on specialist police rather than your average police. You know, we're talking about public order police, firearms police, counter-terrorism police, etc., to manage in a nation of nearly 70 million people, of which a few 100,000 of those may well be kicking off in various parts of the country, more likely in the bigger cities. So the burden on them is huge. And it's easy to say, well, bring in the army, and I'll be like, well, what army? You know, of the 70-odd thousand military personnel that we have, how many are actually combat arms? How many are actually deployable? How many have got the weapons and equipment? You can't replace police with military, unless, of course, you're doing martial law. And that, you know, can you imagine the country under martial law?
Not really. It'd be chaos.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question. Is Islam a threat to the UK?
I think radical Islam, fundamental Islam is the threat to the UK. I think, you know, certainly in UK up until, I guess, 9/11, I suppose, most people who are Muslims have cohabited relatively peacefully. But I think what we've got now is got a situation where, particularly amongst the younger Muslim generations, they're increasingly disgruntled, and they're turning to Islam in order to, and a more radical form of Islam, as their go-to place. And I think we're, you know, and the more, of course, the more then you bring in terms of Muslims who are, you know, illegal immigrants, then that spreads. You know, and you know, you'll find as well that, you know, the more crimes are committed, the more, you know, people go to prison. Well, the prisons are breeding grounds for, you know, the more fundamental aspects of Islam. You see, I think what's happened is that most people are looking at the radical side of Islam as being what Islam is, and it's not that at all. And I think a lot of the texts that people quote as on both on the right side and by Islam is that is taken from the Quran, are taken out of context. Then they're read individually, and the difference is the difference between the sort of theological aspect of Islam and the modern interpretation of Islam from a fundamentalist point of view. And so I think that's where the threat to us comes from. I don't think it comes from as everyday Muslims. You know, I think most of the Muslims I've met in my life, in my extensive time in the Middle East, and indeed in Israel immediately after, you know, Hamas, you know, I can accredit, you know, a Muslim man with certainly saving myself and my team from violence and possibly being killed. So from that perspective, you know, my experience with most Muslims has always been a good one, and in particular with Palestinians. You know, I have great respect for the Palestinians, and I had a great time with them. They're lovely people on the whole when they're allowed to be lovely people. You know, I think you do need to treat them with suspicion, because, you know, when it comes down to it, they are gonna divide on whether they're Shiite or Muslim and Sunni. But even Shia and Sunnis, you know, they hate each other elsewhere else in the world, but will have coexisted historically, certainly up until the Iranian Revolution, quite happily. But it's the world's a bit of a muddle right now into what's going on. You know, I think that to some extent Iran does need to be controlled, and I think the war in Iran, while unpalatable, was probably going to be necessary at some point. And I think it's come now. Whether they can win it or not, well, that's a different kettle of fish.
So last thing I want to say is for the people that are shouting out and saying, come on, where are all the men? Tell me, where are all the men? How does it make you feel?
It makes me feel like they're talking out their arse.
Stand up, where are you men? Come on, we'll go and create war. We will take them down. We will attack them. How does that make you feel?
They're idiots. They're idiots. The reality is this. First of all, we don't have any weapons. Okay, so there's the thing. What we're going to do, get our pitchforks, bows and arrows, crossbows?
People are buying them.
Well, maybe so. But, you know, you're looking at a religion that has been using AK-47s in every conflict that you can think of. There is an abundance of Soviet-made, Chinese-made weapons within the Islamic world. Now, the police can't control the drugs that are coming in. Do you really think they can control weapons that are coming in here? You know, the Islamic community operate on a very, very different set of systems than we do. You know, in terms of financing, you can't trace. Well, it's difficult to trace the financing because they don't work through banks.
So then they are a threat to us. They are an actual threat.
There is a threat, yeah. Of course, there is a threat there, but there's also a threat from the left as well. It's not just from them.
When you say the left, what do you mean?
I mean all the lunatics that are coming out there and
don't know whether they're male or female.
From the river to the sea and all this rubbish. You know, most of them don't even know what river they're talking about or even what sea they're talking about. You know, they've jumped onto a bandwagon, and we already know that most of them are being paid and getting shipped from place to place because the same faces keep showing. So, you know, it's easy to look at Islam as being the bad boy. You know, we're basically by doing that, we're doing what the Nazis did with the Jews. And that's wrong, in my view. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a problem with Islam, but it's radical Islam. But we have the fundamentalist Islam. It's the interpretation by mainly Sunni rather, mainly Sunni interpretation of it, which is a difference between the two sects, if you like, the two branches of Islam. You know, you have Shia, which is very much a theological kind of interpretation, and then you have the Sunni, which is very much about, in the modern context anyway, it's very much about the kind of warrior mentality about, and you know, in normal circumstances they hate each other, you know, but they do coexist. They often share the same mosques as well. So, well, certainly worldwide they do. So you have to understand what the differences between the two main branches of Islam are, and then you've got all the different sects that come out of that. And when you look at the world and you look at what's going on in Iran, you look at what's going on in Syria, you know, this whole thing about the guy coming over and walking the red carpet, I abhor that. The fact that this guy, who was basically Al-Qaeda, was welcomed into UK and walked the red carpet.
Shook hands with Keir, hands with the king.
No, absolutely. But
an outrage.
But it is an outrage that this happens. But what are we doing? We are pampering to this man because we need this man. We need this man. That's why he's had 2 visits to America. That's why he's been to Germany. That's why he's secured $600 million of European funding. And that's why we, as a nation, will be supporting them, because it's in our best interests to, no matter what he did beforehand. So he was Al-Qaeda, okay? He was associated with the Al-Nusra Brigade. And then in 2011, he was sent to Syria, okay? And then in 2013, he rejected ISIS. And then to understand the political concept of that is that we, the Europeans, the US, funded ISIS in the first place in order to be able to get rid of what was then Assad. So, you know, we as an international community, and I include the Europeans, the Brits and the Americans, we were giving money to the people that were most likely to win and do the best for our interests. What happened was we had the Arab Spring, it all kicked off. Things went bad in a lot of different places, you know, not just in Syria, but in Libya, for example, as well, which is still suffering, you know. And so now we're in a position whereby those people that were involved in Al-Qaeda and ISIS being funded by the US and Europe and everybody else. Then suddenly, what do we do now? Well, we turn this into, you know, this is jihad, this is radical fundamentalism. And so now they become big groups in their own rights, and now they'll go to seek domination. But once Assad had fallen, this guy that turned up on the steps of Washington and the Bundestag in Germany and at 10 Downing Street, because of the commitments he's made to Syria and his rejection of ISIS, he's now seen as actually a vital part of our foreign policy going forward in terms of immigration. All nations that have been involved with this guy in Germany, European Union, USA, UK have come to agreements to be able to send Syrians back. And if you look at when he turned up in Germany, there were huge groups of support from Syrian people for him to be there. A lot of these people want to go back. And so what this has done is open the door for those Syrians that do end up going will be able to go back. The other thing it does is it provides a buffer to us. It provides us with counterintelligence for the activities of some of these radical groups, people like ISIS that are still active, or the elements of that. And the other thing it does is, of course, it gives us an opportunity for jobs and investments in Syria, which is for the benefit of our respective national economies. So I understand why Starmer brought him here, just as I understand why Trump did it and why the European Union did it. And I think on the whole it's a good thing, while not denying his, you know, this term terrorist. Was he a terrorist at that time? You know, at that time people would probably interpret him as a freedom fighter because he was fighting against Assad. And we know what Assad was like as a leader. He was brutal. He was massacring his own people. So what is he? Is he a terrorist, or was he a freedom fighter? Was he a freedom fighter who became a terrorist? Well, it seems in this guy's case, he's a freedom fighter in the context of Syria, who then rejected ISIS and Al-Qaeda in order to focus on the nationalistic interest of Syria, and who then was voted in to become the president of Syria, and is now occupying that role as a president. So what do we do? Well, do we just turn around and say, well, you chop people's head off? Well,
I'm sorry, but that first opening statement is, I abhor the fact that he's come over here. Yeah, so if you abhor it, and then we're all going, oh, well, it actually, you know, on the financial level and then protection level, it just doesn't make sense. The whole thing is fucking corrupt.
Because on one hand, I'm having an emotional reaction to this guy because of what Al-Qaeda and ISIS stood for and represented. And yet, in an ideal world, he should be criminally tried at the International Criminal Court, shouldn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But being a pragmatic and going forward, what do you do? We've tried indicting international figures. We tried to indict Bashir from Sudan. What did that get us? Nowhere.
The whole thing is like a game of fucking toy soldiers.
It's complicated. It's
a game. The hierarchy of presidents and prime ministers playing a game whilst the whole of us suffer.
Absolutely.
The people of the countries suffer.
I agree with you. But where do you start to dismantle that? How do you dismantle it to such a state where everybody's happy with it? It's an entanglement that is beyond certainly my ability to figure. I wouldn't know where to start.
A happy, uncomplicated life. It's really that simple. But these people, the elites, complicate shit for us.
But from that, we're of the same mind. You know, I'm planning on finding a piece of land somewhere and just getting out of the way and going off grid. And, you know, in my other context as a survival guy, a primitive skills guy, you know, looking at the way people used to live 10,000 years ago, communities never exceeded more than 100, 150 people. And so they only had to deal with the information that surrounded their structure and those that immediately surrounded them. They didn't give two shits what was happening over in Australia or in Canada or anywhere else, because it was beyond their realm of experience to know that those places even existed, because their little bubble probably consisted of a few 100 miles square. And they operated as a community where they collaborated and they worked together. And they probably had a beautiful, certainly every time I've been to work with primitive tribes, you know, what I tend to find is that on the whole, they're really happy. They're happy doing, you know, I was in the Congo. They had a great time in there. In Papua New Guinea, beautiful people doing nice things. Yeah, there were some bad things that went on in Papua New Guinea as well. You know, men over there are misogynistic pigs, frankly, but on the whole. But, you know, within the jungle, in the communities that they were living with, they were all collaborating. It worked for them. But, you know, we become very comfortable with this lifestyle. You know, we don't go back into flip-flops and shorts and get our hands dirty. Inherently, modern humans are lazy. That's part of the problem. We want anything doing for us.
If you could make one change, just one change, intrinsic change that could actually help, what is it you do? Or are we too far gone?
I think we need to back a party that has the integrity to be able to do what it says it's going to do without compromise.
And who do you think that is?
Well, I think and I hope it's Rupert Lowe, because that's the only one that I can
restore Britain.
Yeah, I am pinning a lot of hope on that man.
Do you think other veterans will support him?
I think quite a few will. I think a lot of veterans will agree with his straightforward talking, his uncompromising position. But we've all been here, haven't we? In terms of politics, you know, you put your hopes into somebody and to something, and then something happens and it just gets destroyed, and you're like, here we go again. You know, they become tarnished, they become corrupted. From what I've seen of what Rupert Lowe's been doing and the work ethic of the man, certainly in terms of Parliament, is the only one at the moment that's actually having an effect on holding the politicians of the day feet to the fire. You know, I watch some of the stuff that he does in Parliament, and you know what? It's very common sense stuff. I love the fact that he is, because this really angers me, that the grooming gangs hasn't been handled of how it should have been handled. It's a failure of government, of integrity, that it's been allowed to do that. And hats off to Tommy Robinson, to be honest, for bringing this to everybody's attention in the way that he's done it. I'm not saying that he was the first or anything like that, but he's the one who has fought tooth and nails to bring this to thing, and he's been punished from it every term. So good on him, you know. He's but it's up to us now. He can only take it so far, and it should have been up to the politicians and the police to investigate those as crimes, which is what they are, without fear or favour. But it seems to me there's an awful lot of people covering their backs on this, and so another reason why I am a Rupert Lowe fan is because of the grooming gangs. Those people are scum. Utter scum. If there's anything that saddens my heart, it's thinking about what those poor people went through. It's now that I'd kill for, without a doubt. And there are many of my colleagues who will probably think the same.
Absolutely.
You know.
Will you be at the May the 16th in London?
Probably.
Tommy Robinson rally?
Probably.
Cool.
Well, there is a chance I may be somewhere else in the world which you know about, but I'm not prepared to talk about it.
Dave, thank you very much for your time.
Thank
It's
you,
been
Rogue.
lovely to see you.
You've been a charming host.
Thank you.